Hi guys, how you doing? I am doing a wee video here about tracking calories and the benefits and pros and cons. I have to be honest and say this is about the sixth or seventh attempt I've made at this video. I got about 8 minutes in to one of them and I stopped and just thought, and it's because I'm very aware that people, particularly in this day and age, like information, like given quickly, bullet points. They want to know blah blah blah, this, and then that's the end of the video, or that's the end of the information. But I personally find this whole concept of like weight loss, tracking calories, focusing on better foods, I find it so nuanced and complex that I find it very difficult to keep it short because there is no matter what anyone tells you, there isn't a simple. It's not simple. In one aspect, it is simple, but in so many other areas, it is simple. And I think when I'm making these videos, I have in mind different people, different points that I'll make. Someone from the past will come into my head that I then think, well, no, that doesn't apply to them, and I want to make them, if they're watching this, I want them to remember that. I want them to know that it doesn't apply to them because there isn't one systematic like way of doing things. So I'm going to try my best to just keep it simple, but it's not that simple, right? So I'm going to just talk about MyFitnessPal, the benefits. If you're not aware of what MyFitnessPal is, it's a tool, it's an app that allows you to track all your food and drink intake. It's got a barcode scanner on it, so you can like scan like anything you buy in the shops, whatever, and it'll tell you. It'll come up immediately. It'll tell you like the nutritional content. Okay, so it's not for everyone, but if you're someone who's maybe in the psychological space that can use it without becoming obsessed with it, then it can be a useful tool for, in my opinion, particularly for educational purposes. So I wouldn't necessarily see MyFitnessPal and tracking calories as a diet. I think as soon as you go down that route of temporary diet idea, it would suggest there's an endpoint to it. There cannot be an endpoint when it comes to this sort of thing, when it comes to like fat loss and weight loss, because your body's constantly adapting. So what I would like anyone who's using MyFitnessPal to do is to try and view it primarily as a an accountability tool, but primarily as an educational tool to allow you to learn more about like what is in foods, good nutrition, not so good nutrition, bad nutrition if you want to call it that. That's just what the shorthand words. It's not a case of good or bad. It's like what foods have like nutritional qualities and what foods have lesser nutritional qualities. What foods are going to like make it easier for you to achieve your like health and fat loss or weight loss goals, and what foods are going to make it harder. Um, with that in mind, it's important to remember that, especially when you start looking at the whole concept of calories in and all that, there's no bad food. There's not one single food, good or bad, inverted commas, right, that is going to like lead you to success or failure. So a lot of the time people might say, oh, I eat really healthily, but if there's no consideration to, for a start, what does healthy mean? How do you define what something, if something's healthy or not? So you have to consider like in the context of your week or your month or whatever, in order to understand like if what you're eating is conducive to where you want to be. So if you're, for example, it's quite common, not that uncommon, but quite common, people might say to me like, oh, I want to lose some weight, I feel like I need to lose 2 stone, I don't know where I'm going wrong because I eat healthy foods. That would imply that there is a good and a bad food, and that if you eat good foods, you should be a certain weight or whatever, or a certain health. You might have certain health markers, but that's the whole point of the whole concept of calories in, calories out, is that it's not as simple as that. Like, so you can still over consume even if the food is perceived as healthy or nutritious. Obviously, though, you need to, in order to like have vitality and health, you do need to prioritise like foods that are more full of nutrients. So MyFitnessPal can just help along the way. So I'm going to give you 2 basic examples simply from a calorie point of view, because I know that that's what people want to know about, as to how it can be useful. So I did a wee pre-oil measurement earlier. So this is where it can come in useful. So that is, I don't know if that looks like a lot of oil, but that's 50 millilitres of oil. So I cook with olive oil and coconut oil and stuff. So if you were to put that into the wok, right, I mean that barely, that's just about, if I roll it about, it's just about covering the bottom of the wok, right? It's just not hugely, there's a wee extra, there's maybe a wee tiny bit of like puddle oil at the bottom there, but if you were to quickly throw in veg and chicken to that, like it would disappear. It's not. There's not. I wouldn't call that. I wouldn't consider that to be an excessive amount of oil. But that was 50 milliliters of oil. So to give you a context, so when you were to type, if you were to type that into MyFitnessPal, 50 milliliters of oil seems like nothing, especially if you're cooking a meal with lots of ingredients. Is about 420 calories, for example. Okay, so that's also one of the reasons why there's the sort of old school way of thinking is like you need avoid fat at all costs. Like fat will make you fat. Like it won't. You need a certain amount, but at the same time, a little goes a long way. So that's where that whole concept comes from, because 400 calories in a very small amount of oil there. But again, if it can, that can be quite eye opening. So if you're someone that just does that with a bottle, for all you know, you're easily, because it's not much, we're talking just 1,000 calories would be about there with oil, which I don't imagine most folk would use that method, but if you're just pouring it, then that's quite easy to do. So that's one example. So if you home cook meals a lot, you might think, well, I'm cooking healthy meals here because I cook from scratch, I don't buy pre-packed food, and there we go. So it's healthy, olive oil, vegetables, but for all you know, you've accidentally thrown in a huge amount of excess calories that probably wouldn't go towards any sort of goals that you're trying to achieve. On the other hand, you could have a pre-packed meal that maybe is considered processed or bad for you, but you could argue that probably that sort of food has the nutritional information on it already, so you know exactly how much you're consuming within that meal, which may lead to, it actually could end up, it might not be perceived as healthier because it's pre-packaged or it's pre-made or whatever, but if it's got nutrients in it, if it's got some decent protein intake in it, and it's controlled in that portion, then it might end up actually being healthier for you than the homemade meal. So that's what I mean about perception. It depends on how you view or see or think what makes a healthy meal. Another example for convenience of how MyFitnessPal can be quite useful is there's a packet of rice. So this is just a pre-packet made rice. So if you are trying, you can't be bothered weighing out food or weighing out your rice if you're going to use MyFitnessPal. Now the advantage of just buying white rice is cheaper, right? These packets are pretty expensive for what they are. You're paying for the convenience on them. They're already cooked. They've got a nice flavour. But from a MyFitnessPal point of view, they tell you exactly what you need to know. So, because that's the nutritional information in the back. So that's a 250 gram packet. So if you were to eat that entire packet, you might think, oh God, I better not have a whole packet of that because I'm trying to go lower carb. So you might well try to go lower carb, and let's suppose you're trying to keep your carbohydrate intake to around 100 grams a day, which for nearly everyone would be a low carb. So again, low carb depends on the person. So if Andy Murray in his prime, like if he was having 300 grams of carbohydrate a day, to him, in the context as a percentage of his overall required intake, that would be low carb. Whereas to Sheila, who's 5'1" and works in the office and doesn't have much of an active job because she's just on the computer all day making phone calls and things like that, she doesn't exercise much, 300 grams of carbs a day would be like excessively high carbohydrate. So a high carbohydrate diet to one person could be a low carbohydrate diet to another person. It depends on the person. So 100 grams of carbohydrates though for most people would be considered pretty low carb. And so in other words, there's 23 grams of carbohydrates in half a packet of this. So in an entire packet of this rice, there's less than 50 grams of carbohydrates. So in other words, if you're going down the tracking route, most folk would quite easily be able to have a whole packet of that on a daily basis. Again, it depends on the context of what they're having for breakfast and lunch, but it gives you an idea of like what low carb actually means in real world terms. Because sometimes in the past, if I said, right, obviously when it comes to a 12-week like intense shred, like you might go a bit restrictive for a long time and you cut out rice, cut out potatoes, cut out all these things, and yeah, you'll get results and you might get them quite quickly. But it's trying to recognise what do we do then at the 12-week mark when you stop? Like what's the goal after that? So that's what I'm saying about if you're going to use MyFitnessPal, you're better using it as an educational tool to start to learn what is an appropriate portion size for you as an individual based on your activity levels, your current height and weight, that kind of thing. Because again, if you're 6'1", 90 kilos and very active, which I am, then what I would take as a portion that's going to allow me to maintain my current weight is going to look very different to someone whose job's maybe a bit less active, who's maybe 15, 20 years older, or they're maybe 5'4", 5'5". So these things all come into play. So that's where MyFitnessPal can become quite useful, or can become very useful. On the other hand, the danger is you become too caught up in the numbers, and that's what I was talking about briefly in the email I mentioned. That a lot of it's to do with the psychology of the person, and if you're someone that has a wee bit neurotic when it comes to calories, in terms of like measuring like the quality of a workout by the calorie burn, there is a potential daily slippery slope that you're going to go down, and you're going to become a wee bit too obsessed with it, and that is not what. So that's not ideal. You're just repeating past behaviours related to like a dieting approach. So I just wanted to give a wee quick insight into that. I don't want the video to go on too long. As I said, I think I could be here for hours talking about the psychology of it all, because I feel like it's not that simple. I've just made it sound quite simple, and for some people it is that simple. But for a lot of people it's more complex than that, because although they know what they want to do and how to do it and what the methodology is, there's something deeper inside that's maybe stopping them. And I know it sounds a bit like fanciful to some people, but I do think there's something bigger going on. If it's a year in, year out thing where you feel you just cannot seem to get on top of it, or you can't do what you want to do, it's maybe there's some sort of like response. Maybe food and drink is some sort of like response to adversity, or a companion to adversity, as a result of something that's happened, or is ongoing, or whatever. So I don't know. I want to try and keep the video short though. So yeah, so just the key though, whatever you're doing, if you're doing a MyFitnessPal, the key is consistency. So that's the one thing. So for example, if people are saying, well, I've had the protein intake has to be the same pretty much every day, including Saturday, Sunday. So there's no point doing it well one Monday to Thursday and then it's quite low. You hit your protein quite low. It's like 70, 60 grams at the weekend. It has to be at the targeted level we've given you every day, because it's about maintaining muscle mass while you're in a deficit. So it's at a protect. So to almost see the protein intake as a shield to protect your precious existing muscle tissue. At the same time, it will also help keep you satiated, the higher protein intake, so that if you're in that deficit, if you're maintaining it, at one point you're going to start getting hungry, because that's what happens with a deficit, because your body starts to fight back. I mentioned it wants to take back, it doesn't want to lose weight, it wants to hold on to it, so it's going to start sending out hormone signals to say eat more, right? So your ghrelin levels are going to start going up. That's your body's way of literally saying eat more food. So you need to combat that, and one of the best ways to combat that is making sure you're eating a decent amount, so the deficit's not too aggressive, but keeping protein intake high, because high protein levels daily help sort of like suffocate the noise of ghrelin, the sound of the hunger hormones. So I think I've covered this in videos before, but I just thought I'd do a quick refresh. So if you're wanting a bit of help with it, feel free to get in touch, and I'll hopefully be able to get back to you. It's one of those things, it's not that once you've got up and running, it's just up to you to keep monitoring it and keep it consistent. But if you're struggling with it, or if you're struggling generally, like just try and show a bit of compassion to yourself and a bit of patience with yourself. Like, don't beat yourself up about it. Try not to, I don't know, I think I said just it was a while back, so someone came into the session, they seemed quite low, and they said they felt ashamed of like the fact that they were struggling so much to eat well, and they were having takeaways, and I just felt, I don't know, I just wanted to give this person a hug and say there's nothing to be ashamed of. Like, there's bigger things going on in life, and like if you know, if that's the thing you're most ashamed of, you're in a good place in a lot of ways. You know, you just don't realise it. So just be kind to yourself, have patience, and just trust the process. And if you get stuck, start again. You don't need to give up. You can just restart, and we'll try and figure things out. You can only just keep trying. You know, and in the meantime, if you think there's further, deeper things you need to explore, like go back, then do that. Like I mentioned in that email about This Is Us, that is a brilliant television series, and one of the key characters has a lifelong battle with her weight, and it's all linked to trauma. And there's definitely people that that have that issue as well. Like, and it's something that you either eventually you might just embrace and learn to be happy in who you are, or if you feel that your health is becoming compromised by your weight, then by all means that's a good reason to try and combat it. But maybe you need to go deeper to combat it. Look beyond the weight, look beyond the food. Anyway, as I said, I don't want to start going on about this stuff. It's so important, but it will go on forever, and then people will tell me the video's too long, so I'm not going to watch it. Right, see you soon.